This is your guide to list building using 2 combat patrols in 30 minutes or less.
I'm Old One-Eye.
And I am the Death Leaper.
And today we are building an army out of 2 combat patrol Tyranids.
Yes.
Death Leaper, if we buy 2 combat patrol Tyranids, what do we get?
We are going to get 2 winged Tyranid primes. We are going to get 2 psychophages. We are going to get 6 von Ryan's Leapers. We are going to get 10 Barbgaunts. And we are going to get 40 Termagants armed with flesh borers. And we are going to get 4 Ripper Swarms.
Yep, and a quick note, this list is a little bit of a departure. We're actually only going to be able to fit in 2 of those Ripper Swarms.
Mm-hmm.
So the other 2, hold on to them. You might end up using them later. There are some extra points here or there that you could probably cut and end up putting those in if you like the way that the Ripper Swarms play.
Or you can paint them and have them as cute little desk minis.
You could. You could paint them and you could put them on your desk at work. And people will ask you, what are those? And you'll say, they are Ripper Swarms. And then people will walk away from you because they won't want to talk to you anymore.
I still need to take my war boss to work.
Mm-hmm. So, what are we going to add to get to 1,000 points out of all these models that we already have?
To get to 1,000 points, we are going to add 2 3-model squads of Tyranid warriors. And those Tyranid warriors need to be the melee bioweapons Tyranid warriors.
Yep. And we are going to have to pick a detachment.
Yes. And the detachment is Invasion Fleets.
Mm-hmm. We're going to pick Invasion Fleet, and we're going to have to pick a Warlord.
Well, we have 2 Tyranid primes, so I think it only makes sense to make one of them the Warlord.
Yeah, one of them has to be the Warlord. Those are the only 2 characters we have so far. So we're going to pick Invasion Fleet because we have this kind of odd mix of models from the combat patrols. It's like a recurring theme. We ran into this with the Necrons as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so by picking Invasion Fleet, most of our models can use the stratagems, which is pretty important. And then the other thing it's going to give us is a lot of flexibility, because the Invasion Fleet special rule is that at the beginning of the battle, you pick whether you want sustained hits against infantry and swarms, whether you want lethal hits against monsters or vehicles, or whether you want your critical hits to have the precision keyword, which will let you take key characters out of your opponent's squads. And the really nice thing is you actually do that at the start of the first battle round. So you've seen your opponent's army, you've seen their deployment, and then you get to pick that ability.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so some things to kind of highlight at 1,000 points. We're adding in these warriors. We're going to put the primes with the warriors. They can join those squads.
Okay.
And kind of 2 things to highlight are there are 2 stratagems that we should really highlight, and they're combos with the warriors. So one of them is predatory imperative, and that's going to allow you to change which of those keywords you picked at the beginning of the battle for one squad. Or if it's a synapse squad or within synapse range, you will get to do it for 2 squads. So what that means is you can actually change the keyword on both of your warriors for 1 command point.
Okay.
And then the other stratagem that we're going to highlight is Adrenal Surge, which allows you to crit on a 5 or better. And one thing that's really going to be a theme in this list is using critical hits and fishing for critical hits. So being able to do that on a 5 is going to be really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to put the warriors and the primes together. And then our Von Ryan's Leapers have the infiltrate keyword. So that means they can start the game outside of our deployment zone. So we can put them either in like a key spot or you can even put them like near an objective so they can reach out and grab an objective on the first turn, or they can complete like a secondary mission for you. The other thing the Von Ryan's Leapers do is they have the fight first keyword.
Mm-hmm.
So that means no matter what, they're fighting before whatever's attacking them, unless it also has fights first. And then they can also use the heroic intervention stratagem, which lets them, the way that works is when you get charged, they can pay a command point normally, but Von Ryan's Leapers can do it for free. They get to charge into that same fight. And because they have fights first, they will actually fight before the charging unit.
Oh, nice.
So that lets you protect some of your other key pieces. And then the psychophages have an aura. So everything in their aura gets a feel no pain. So that is going to help make some of our really weak models, like our termagants, that is going to make them a little tougher. So they're going to be better at holding objectives. So in this 1,000 point list, you probably want to put 20 of your termagants near your 2 psychophages. So 20 near each of the 2 psychophages. And then we're going to use our barb gaunts to kind of stay back and hold our home objective, because the barb gaunts have a really pretty long range. They have about a 48-inch range. And then they have the heavy keyword.
Mm-hmm.
So they gain a benefit from not moving. So just having them kind of camp out on the home objective is just a really great spot for them. And then finally, the 2 little Ripper Swarms that we're going to run, they are just going to stick around. And really the thing that they're going to do is they're going to block something in the early game, or they can do missions that don't require an action. So a really good example of that is in Pariah Nexus, one of the secondary missions is called Containment, and you have to have a unit at the board edge, out of your deployment zone within 9 inches of a board edge. And so the Rippers are really good at doing that. You just kind of throw them near the front of your deployment zone, and if you draw Containment on the first turn, they can just waltz right out of your deployment zone and score a containment for you. So that's kind of how we're gonna put the pieces together at 1,000 points, and what these models in the Combat Patrol combined with the Warriors are going to do for us.
I just want to point out that the psychophage looks like a giant spider, and in addition to the whatever those are called,
Tendrils, mandibles.
In addition to the mandibles, they also have little tentacles that are coming out of its like maw. It's disgusting.
It is. It's a great model.
So if you are afraid of spiders, maybe this one's not a great one.
I think it's a fine one. I don't. It looks a little spidery, but it's not too spidery. The Venom Crawler, I think, from Chaos is a little more spidery than it. But so what are we going to add to get to 1,500 points?
To get to 1,500 points, we are going to add a Hive Tyrant. We are going to add a Tyrannofex with a Raptor Cannon. And one of our Tyranid Warrior squads, we're going to make that from 3 to 6. We're going to add another box of Tyranid Warriors with the melee violet weapons.
Yeah. Yep. So we're adding the Hive Tyrant because he is going to lower the cost of command points for things that are near him.
And are we going to make him the Warlord since he's also a character?
We're not going to make him the Warlord.
Oh, why not?
So the Tyranid Prime moves a little faster, especially if you disconnect it from the Warriors. If you don't run it with the Warriors, most of the time you will want to have it with the Warriors, but sometimes you might not do that. And in the instances that you don't do that, it moves much faster. It moves 12 inches.
Oh, wow.
And it flies. And so one of the things that's really nice about that is if you are behind, at the end of the third turn, you can choose to take a secret mission. And one of the secret missions is to get your Warlord on your opponent's home objective. And if the Tyranid Prime stays our warlord, he's really good at doing that because he's infantry, so he can move through ruins. He can move through ruin walls.
Nice.
And he flies, so he can move over enemy models.
Mm-hmm.
So he can very reliably get to that objective if we need him to. He might not live, but he can get there. And if you're taking a secret mission, you're probably a little desperate anyway. And so, it's a gamble, but it's a gamble that's probably worth it.
Fair enough.
So the Hive Tyrant's going to lower the point cost or the command point cost of stratagems, and we're going to be using the Adrenal Surge stratagem a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to be able to lower the cost of that. He also is going to give assault and lethal hits to ranged weapons that are close to him. Mm-hmm. So that can help make the Barb Gaunts a little more mobile if we're playing a mission where we don't really need to camp out on our home objective.
Gotcha.
It's also going to make our Termagants a little more threatening if they're close to the Hive Tyrant. Most of the time, you're going to be running them close to the Psychophages to get that Feel No Pain aura. But if they happen to be close to the Hive Tyrant, giving them lethal hits is really nice, just because the volume of shots that they can put out. And then the Tyrannofex with the Rupture Cannon, we are taking that to deal specifically with enemy tanks and monsters. The Tyrannofex will very commonly just one-shot a monster or a tank. Like Space Marine Dreadnought, Predator, Vindicator. He's really good at cracking open a transport. If your opponent has a bunch of Orc boys or Orc knobs hiding out in a truck, the Tyrannofex is really good at just saying, okay, well, I'm going to shoot that and it's going to explode. And now those guys are out on the table and our warriors can now charge them and do all of their shenanigans with sustained hits and re-rolling their ones and using Adrenal Surge to get even more sustained hits, and you can just kind of melt those infantry squads that were in those transports.
Nice.
So those are just a couple synergies that we're picking up at 1,500 points. We're not trying to add a ton of bodies. We already have kind of a flood with the Termagants. Mm-hmm. We don't need to add a ton of pieces. We just need to add some resiliency and some synergies. And then what are we adding to get to 2,000 points?
2,000 points, we're going to add another Tyrannofex with Raptor Cannon. And then the other warrior squad, we are also going to take that from a 3-man squad to a 6-man squad. So we're adding another box of the Tyranid warriors with melee bioweapons. We are going to add 3 squads of 10 Hormagaunts. And then we are doing, we're taking Synaptic Lit Pen for the Hive Tyrant, and we are taking Perfectly Adapted for one of the Tyranid Primes. Now that Perfectly Adapted, do we want to put that on the Warlord Tyranid Prime?
We probably want it on the Warlord. There's an argument to be made to not put it on the Warlord, just because you're probably going to want to get aggressive with the squad that has Perfectly Adapted on it. And like I said, there is a world where we might want to use the Warlord to do a secret mission. Mm-hmm. But I think it's fine either way. That's getting into like really nitpicky or like really deep level strategy that most new players are probably just not going to be ready for.
Gotcha.
So I think just having it on the Warlord is fine. And so the Tyrannofex, we're going to equip him the same way. We want him to have the Rupture Cannon, and it's for that same reason. Right now we're going to have 2 things that can really reliably take down a tank or a transport. The warriors, it's the same thing. We want big squads of warriors to be able to benefit from the Adrenal Surge stratagem so that they are getting lots of sustained hits. And they will take things down just by volume of attacks alone.
Nice.
And then we are adding the Hormagaunts because that's going to give us kind of a first wave. Hormagaunts move 10 inches. So they're fast. Mm-hmm. they can advance and charge. So they can move 10 and then add a d6 to that movement, and then they can still charge 2d6. So the amount of the board that they can threaten is huge. And individually, they aren't very good. But when 10 of them charges into something, they deliver a lot of attacks. And remember that kind of what we're trying to do is take advantage of all these critical hits. So if you use Adrenal Surge on them, they could get sustained hits or lethal hits on 5s. So it's going to give us this kind of first wave. And then after those Hormagaunts have either charged things and kind of tied them up, held them in place for a little while, or kept our opponent in, like, pushed back into their own deployment zone, so that we can kind of take control of the center of the table, then we can come in with things like our Warriors, our Hive Tyrant, and we can start to really finish off our opponent's kind of aggressive squads.
Very, very swarmy list.
Yeah, it's a very swarm-based list. It's going for just a lot of volume of attacks to fish for those sustained hits and those lethal hits. And then we're taking Synaptic Linchpin. The Hive Tyrant is going to move a little slower than some of the other stuff in the army, especially the Hormagaunts, and in some cases the Tyranid Warriors when they start getting aggressive and charging. And so having that extra synapse range is really helpful, because models that are within your synapse range get +1 strength.
Now, what is synapse?
So synapse is the Tyranid army rule. It's one of the Tyranid army rules. They actually have 2. They have synapse and shadow in the warp. And synapse is whenever you're within 6 inches of a synapse creature, you roll 3d6 for your leadership instead of 2d6.
Oh, that's really good.
And then the other thing it gives you is if you're within synapse range, all of your melee attacks get +1 strength.
Oh, wow.
And the really nice thing about that is your synapse creatures give that to themselves. So the Warriors, even though on paper they only have a strength of 5, they actually have a strength of 6. Because they are a synapse creature, they give themselves +1 strength.
Nice. So it's kind of like the orcs with the Wa.
Yeah. It's except instead of being for a single turn from command phase to command phase, it is anytime you're in that synapse range.
That's super awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's definitely good. And it puts a lot of the models at what would be considered like breakpoints. So, for example, our Hormagaunts are strength 3, which means they need like a 5 to wound a lot of the toughness 4 models in the game. But because when they're in synapse range, they get +1 strength, takes them from strength 3 to strength 4, which now means they need 4s. So it's effectively about a 16 to 17% damage increase.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's a nice effect, and this army can take advantage of it pretty heavily. And so that's why we want that Synaptic Linchpin enhancement.
Nice.
And then Perfectly Adapted, we're just taking, it's a reroll. You can reroll hits and wounds with it, so it helps make that Tyranid Prime, but even better at getting those critical hits that we're kind of constantly fishing for in this list. And then kind of the last thing we could do.
Yeah, because you were telling me about an alternative we could do.
Yeah, there is an alternative. You could drop Synaptic Linchpin and Perfectly Adapted, and you could put in the Ripper Swarms. Or you could drop Synaptic Linchpin and Perfectly Adapted and the 30 Hormagaunts, and instead you could add 1 Broodlord and 10 Gene Stealers.
And why would we do that?
So the reason we would do that is that could allow you to move into a different detachment. That detachment is called Vanguard Onslaught.
Okay.
Your Tyranid Prime, your Warriors, and your Von Ryan's Leapers will also benefit from the rules of that detachment. And I don't want to go too deep into it, other than just to say that if you want a different play style out of these 2 combat patrols, you can kind of lean this way instead.
Gotcha. Nice.
And then the other thing is It's quite a bit cheaper, I think, to buy a Broodlord and the 10 Gene Stealers than it is to buy the 3 boxes of Hormigaunt. So if you're trying to save money, that's another reason to do it.
Okay.
And then the other reason to do it is the Broodlord and the Gene Stealers together get a lot of attacks that have the devastating wounds keyword. And so if you find that you're struggling against really tank-heavy armies, like most people play against a group of 3 or 4 of their buddies, and they play the same opponents over and over and over. So if you have a friend that's just taking a ton of really tough units, or if somebody in your play group is playing like Imperial or Chaos Knights, and you just find that you're struggling into that with these swarm kind of attacks, and you're ready to jump up to 2,000 points, you may want the Broodlord and the Gene Stealers just to gain access to the devastating wounds.
Makes sense.
So that's an alternative. I do think the list plays really well with the Hormigaunts, though. I think it's really fun to play them because you get that first wave, second wave, and that feeling of like a Tyranid swarm. Like if Space Marine is what brought you to Warhammer, this list plays out like Space Marine.
Yeah, and that Hive Tyrant is absolutely gymongous. Like if you look at if you go to the Warhammer website, like it'll show you it like to scale next to like a little Space Marine model how big this model is, and just to like the Space Marine base has a width of 32 millimeters, and the Hive Tyrant is 60 millimeters.
You did not look up the Tyrannofex, did you?
The Hive Tyrant.
I know. You should look up the Tyrannofex.
Oh, no.
It's quite a bit larger. And while you're doing that, I'll give kind of my overall thoughts on the list, and then you can give yours. So my thoughts on this list is it's a great way to learn keywords. It's great for a new player. You have a mix of models. You get light infantry, medium infantry. You get some heavier units. And so I think for a new player, you're going to learn a lot by playing this list. You also have some timing and things like that you're going to learn from the stratagems. So overall, I think this is a really good place to start if you're going to start Tyranids. What about you?
Well, it doesn't show me next to a Space Marine, but that looks pretty big.
It's much larger than the Hive Tyrant.
That's wild. Anyway, I think this is a really fun list. I think it is very swarmy, and if they were orcs, they would be proper orky. I think that's what they would say, just because of how fighty they are.
Yeah, it's definitely, you've got a lot of attacks. You've got a lot of attacks from the warriors. You've got a lot of shots from the Termagants. And if you go the Hormigaunt's route, you have a lot of attacks from the Hormigaunt's, and you're getting to the fight fast.
Yeah, this is an army that I would for sure be interested in seeing how it plays out, to see if it is, like you say, just as swarmy as Space Marine.
It's close.
I believe it. That's a lot of models.
So I have been Old One Eye.
And I have been the Death Leaper.
Thanks for tuning in.